Croods, A New Age. And what a perfectly fitting title, because the first film felt like it was released during a completely different age. When looking back at the original, I personally feel like this is the weakest among Chris Sanders' works, at least compared to Lilo and Stitch and How to Train Your Dragon. This is not to say that this is a bad movie at all. It definitely has its merits, like some enjoyable characters, and of course, the beautifully rich and highly detailed animation that allowed the people at DreamWorks to make a creatively colorful and immersive world. Then again, it also has its share of issues like a weak story, a moral that keeps obnoxiously hammering its audience, and mixed humor that can range from decent to unpleasantly juvenile. It's obviously far from DreamWorks' best, but it does make for some good eye candy, and even has a bit of its own charm. At least enough for it to be a big hit and get an Oscar nomination, so it shouldn't be a surprise that a sequel was going to inevitably happen. Maybe no one expected the wait to be that long because they had to scrap an entire concept for a follow-up and rebuild it from the ground up, but at least the sequel finally showed up. But now that the family is back with a brand new and modern discovery after almost 8 years, will the wait be worth it? Or was the wait too long where the Croods' relevancy was left in the past? Let's find out. The story. Boy, am I glad to have rewatched the original to prepare me for this, because if I haven't, I wouldn't have noticed how the sequel shares a lot of similarities with the original narrative-wise. Think about it. It's about a cave family using their primitive survival instincts in order to find a new home. But then they stumble upon a beautifully colorful jungle filled with creative creatures and meet a human, or humans in this case, that are a lot more modern in their style of living than the Croods. But after clashing over their ideologies, and especially with what Eep wants the most, they all realize they have to work together and mix their lifestyles in order to get themselves out of danger and stay together as a family. Obviously, the story is not the movie's strongest suit, especially when it returns to the predecessor's lack of subtlety with what it wants to say about the characters and what it wants to teach the audience, that it makes it hard not to predict what the next outcome would be. I mean, with a G-rated film about family and working together, how else do you think the Croods and the Bettermans solve their problems when they get stuck in a sticky situation? That, and the humor is a noticeable downgrade. As a feature with no care for subtleness, while some can get a laugh, most of the jokes rely on being obnoxious, always feeling like it's in your face and constantly loud to the point that some gags are literally just characters screaming. Like, that's it. That's the joke.
Part chicken, part seal, all screamer.
However, the biggest difference between the first and the second is the center of attention, what it primarily focuses on throughout the film. In the original, it's more about the world around the characters, to explore this vibrant and creative jungle during the Croods' journey to tomorrow. In the sequel, it's actually about the characters, how they feel when in the Betterman's home, and how it contrasts to their way of living, especially when dealing with the Bettermans themselves. I'll get more onto that later, but I'll say now that they really make the movie feel uncomfortable. With the frequent chaotic nature like in the editing and almost everyone butting heads, watching the film can often feel like being stuck in the middle of a family reunion where most of your relatives are just angrily arguing at each other. Fortunately though, the movie does improve once the second half kicks in and the punch monkeys enter the scene. That's when most of the cliches and the family conflicts going on get mostly thrown out Funk's window to return the spotlight more onto the original strengths. It focuses on the environments and even giving it a bit of a backstory. There are more unique animals that come in, like the wolf spiders and the variety of different monkeys, and the scenes become a lot more action-oriented where the families and the animals get themselves out of peril, ultimately building up to a fun and a bit of an exciting finale that surprisingly gets engaging. It does take a while for the story to get to the good part, and the movie can make the wait feel grueling, but once it does, it kinda makes the sequel worthwhile. The animation. Correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the first things I notice when watching A New Age is that the animation feels slightly different than the original. Not everything is different though, it's mainly regarding the character animation. In the first film, while the movements are lively, it's noticeable that they are more realistic because of the use of motion capture to bring the characters to life. In the follow-up, however, the characters were fully given to the hands of the animators, allowing the Croods to become more expressive and bring out more energy than the human body is capable of doing. Admittedly, the difference at first can be jarring, especially when directly jumping from the original to this one. But I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, don't get me wrong. On its own, the animation is still great, and the jarring factor doesn't even last long once you get used to the style the movie is going for. Anyways, if there is one thing this movie got right, it's bringing back the best thing about its predecessor, which is crafting the beautiful looking animation. But it didn't just give it a comeback, it also added more to what it already built to expand the world and give its concepts even more possibilities, on top of a few extra 2D animated fun moments that highlight Eep and Guy's perspective. The backgrounds are still as large as ever, filled with a strong use of color like around the Betterman's home and areas that have their own elemental themes. The designs feature plenty more animal combinations and variants of the punch monkeys that allow the animators to play with them in so many ways, and the action scenes make the most out of combining all of this in order to make them the highlights of the movie.
Get your head in the game! That's my girl!
If I would have to give the animation one piece of criticism, however, it's that there's not as much of the wow factor as before. Like I said, the movie's focus has shifted onto the characters, which unfortunately gives less attention to the world around them and, consequentially, the animation. And while some of that is still prominent throughout the feature to create some good-looking moments, it doesn't unleash its full potential until around the end of the film. In a way, its priority towards the characters kinda held the animation back. Not by a whole lot, but there were so many times that it could have done so much more. But even with that, it doesn't ruin the experience of watching the visuals, and the animation still stands as the Croods' best element. The characters. Look, I get it. A general reason to why people would want to watch a sequel is to see the characters from the last film come back on a new adventure. So it makes sense that the cast now plays a bigger role in the film to take more of the spotlight this time. And while the characters were not all that great in the first movie either, not only are they one of the movie's weaker assets, but they feel like they've gotten a bit of a downgrade from before, where most of them have been reduced to tiresome and generic tropes. Granted, the voice acting do their best in their part to make the most out of the materials that they were given, and the actors did sound like they had a lot of fun when recording their lines, but even that doesn't really do a whole lot to give the movie any favors to make its characters enjoyable. Among those that returned, Eep and Guy are the teenage lovers that the film tries way too hard to display their affection that it could even make the most hopeless romantic roll their eyes as their obnoxious PDA gets predictably tested at the Bettermans. Grug is the typical worrying father that cares too much about keeping the family together. Ugga is the mom of the family and Grug's supporter. Thunk is nothing but a one-note joke who is obsessed with his TV, or in this case, his window. And Gran is the cynical and spunky old lady that reminisces about her prime in the past. The only character that hasn't changed is the baby Sandy, and that's because she's more like a vicious dog. As for the new additions, there are only 3 that come in the form of the Bettermans. The couple, Phil and Hope, are kind of like the villains where they started with their goal to make Guy stay in their home and trick the Croods to leave without him, since they had a history with Guy's family in the past. Sure, they can have a bit of a superiority complex due to how civilly advanced and more modern they are compared to the Croods, but they're technically not wrong though. With the new update on the family's personalities, they at least feel more tolerable than hanging out with a group of running gags.
We are the Bettermans.
Better man?
Emphasis on the better.
We happy meet you. Thanks.
Oh.
But then there's Dawn, the daughter of Phil and Hope, and possibly the only character with some good substance. In a way, she is similar to Eep, where she wants to see the world outside of the walls of her home to experience something new. and Eep is her opportunity to live that excitement and have a chance to embrace her more rebellious and adventurous side that is key to help the two families work together later on. Yes, the Croods are back, and it does make sense that the movie named after them should be a lot more about them. But while it's understandable to enjoy the Croods, the movie, it's honestly tough to enjoy the Croods, the characters. After almost 8 years of waiting for a sequel to a somewhat decent DreamWorks movie, I guess it shouldn't be too much of a surprise that it did come out okay. The Croods: A New Age is a passable yet minor downgrade to its predecessor that managed to recapture the same achievements that made the first film enjoyable. But it also comes mixed with some of the same and even more problems. While it can have a dreary start with some annoying characters, an unenthusiastically predictable story, and a whole bunch of weak humor, it does balance it out with some greatly crafted animation, some solid voice acting, and unleashing its true potential by the end to deliver an epic finale. I think fans of the first film would most likely get the most kick out of it, but outside of that, I do recommend checking out some parts because there are moments that are worth seeing, but in terms of the movie in its entirety, it's hard to suggest anything more than a rental. It may have come out in a new age, but the Croods are still the same as they were before, even receiving the same reception from critics and audiences.
Thanks.
Oh.